Must inform members that the clerk of the committee can only receive motions for the election of the chair. The clerk cannot receive other types of motions, cannot entertain points of order, nor participate in debate. Nous pouvons donc procéder à l'élection à la présidence.
We can now proceed to the election of the chair pursuant to Standing Order 106.2. The chair must be a member of the government party. I am ready to receive motions for the chair.
Madam Clerk, I'd like to nominate MP Raj Sani for chair.
Thank you, Mr. Sarai. It's been moved by Mr. Sarai that Mr. Sani be elected to be nominated for the position of chair. Are there any other nominations? Seeing none, is it the pleasure of the committee to adopt this motion?
Yes.
Yes.
I declare the motion adopted and Mr. Sani duly elected chair of the committee. Mr. Sani, I will turn it over to you.
He's going to first have to learn how to take his mic off mute.
Sorry.
Lesson number 1.
Thank you very much, everybody. I'm really excited to be joining this committee, and I'm thankful and humbled by your confidence in me. It's an honor for me to get the opportunity to work with all of you. Some of you I worked with on other committees, and really to strengthen our relationship with our oldest friend and ally. I hope that we can do a lot of good work together, unified in our shared Canadian values, and work together to strengthen our economic relationship with the United States. In this committee, I consider us all Canadians, and I look forward to working with all of you as members of Team Canada, and that we shall serve Canadians and serve our constituents with great ability and confidence. I now want to take any recommendations for vice chairs.
Are we using the raise hand feature, Chair, or how do we do this?
I just raised my hand.
Yes, sorry, Mr. Lewis, sorry, I didn't see it.
Oh, thank you. So first and foremost, congratulations. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I'm looking very much forward to working with you, sir. Sir, I would put forward Mark Strahl, MP Mark Strahl, as vice chair of this committee.
Okay, any other nominations? Oh, sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If I may jump in here. Just so members know, pursuant to the motion adopted in the House on February 16th, 2021, the committee may also elect 3 vice chairs, 1 from the official opposition, 1 from the Bloc Québécois, and 1 from the New Democratic Party. So we'll proceed in that order. And so it has been moved by Mr. Lewis that Mr. Mark Strahl be elected vice chair of the committee. Are there any other motions? Is it the pleasure of the committee to adopt the motion?
Yes.
Here. So, Mr. Chair, I declare that Mr. Mark Strahl has been elected as vice chair of the committee. Would you like me to continue on with the other vice chairs?
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Je suis maintenant prête à recevoir des motions.
I am now ready to receive motions for a vice president from the Bloc. Ms. Romanado. Thank you very much. I nominate Mr. Savard-Tremblay. It is moved by Ms. Romanado that Mr. Savard-Tremblay be elected vice president of the committee. Is it your wish to adopt the motion? Wait.
And Mr. Savard-Tremblay, dûment élu comme vice-président du comité. I'm now prepared to receive motions for the vice chair from the New Democratic Party. Ms. Bendanayan.
Thank you, Madam Clerk, and it is a pleasure and an honor to nominate my colleague, Mr. Blakey, from the NDP as vice chair of this committee.
Thank you. It's been moved by Ms. Bendayan that Mr. Blakey be elected as vice chair of the committee. Is it the pleasure of the committee to adopt this motion?
Yes.
Yes.
I declare Mr. Blakey duly elected as vice chair of the committee, and Mr. Chair, I will turn it back to you.
Thank you very much. Yes, Ms. Bendayan.
Thank you. If it is with the permission of the chair, I would like to move a routine motion.
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you very much. And so I will begin with analyst services. I propose that the committee retain as needed and at the discretion of the chair the services of one or more analysts from the Library of Parliament to assist the committee in its work.
Any debate? Not see any. Passed.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Pour poursuivre.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A subcommittee on Agenda and Procedure, that the subcommittee on Agenda and Procedure be established and be composed of 5 members, the chair, 1 member from each party, and that the subcommittee work in a spirit of collaboration. Débat? Adopté. Réunion
to receive evidence and to have that evidence printed when a quorum is not present, provided that at least 4 members are present, including 2 members of the opposition and 2 members of the government. But when traveling outside the parliamentary precinct, that the meeting begin after 15 minutes, regardless of members present.
Any debate? So moved.
Temps alloué pour les allocutions d'ouverture.
Time for opening remarks and questioning of witnesses. That witnesses be given 5 minutes for their opening statement. That in consultation with the vice chairs, the chair be allowed to adjust this time, and that at the discretion of the chair, the time for the first turn be 6 minutes for the first questioner for each party, as follows: Conservative Party, Liberal Party, Bloc Québécois, New Democratic Party. For the second and subsequent rounds, the order and time for questioning be as follows: Conservative Party, 5 minutes, Liberal Party, 5 minutes, Bloc Québécois, 2.5 minutes, New Democratic Party, 2.5 minutes, Conservative Party, 5 minutes, Liberal Party, 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I just would like to propose that we ensure that every member of the committee is given a chance to ask questions of the witnesses before another member is given 2 opportunities to ask questions. So I would propose that we amend the proposal, and I'll start at the wording for second and subsequent rounds. For the second and subsequent rounds, the order and time for questioning be as follows: Conservative Party, 5 minutes, Liberal Party, 5 minutes, Conservative Party, 5 minutes, Liberal Party, 5 minutes, Bloc Québécois, 2.5 minutes, New Democratic Party, 2.5 minutes. So the times would be the same, but we would ensure that each member of this committee, who are all equal, are given an opportunity to question before any other member is given a second opportunity. So I would move that friendly amendment.
Yes, Mr. Blakey.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to speak to the amendment and just state my opposition to that. I sit on a couple of other committees, and it's a departure from the practice that has been adopted at many other committees in this Parliament. I don't see a reason for the departure myself. I respect that members have an equal voice on the committee, but we also do represent the interests of different parties and different Canadians who've elected those parties to Parliament, and have a responsibility to get those views on the record. And that's certainly the spirit in which I undertake those additional 2.5 minutes. And that's why I think the order that I'm accustomed to at other committees ought to stand.
Ms. Romanado.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I'm in agreement with my colleague from the NDP. I chair the NDP committee, and I know that often what happens is that at the end of the second round, often we run out of time, and so it's often the NDP and the Bloc historically that would get cut off. So I think it's fair to have that sandwiched in between the two the government and the official opposition party, that we have the 2.5 minutes for the bloc and the 2.5 minutes for the NDP to make sure that they get a second round. Thank you.
Mr. Holback?
Yeah, Chair. The problem I see, and we've seen this in the Trade Committee with Mr. Blakeney, I sit on it with him, is like Mr. Ramanano has said, you run out of time. But the reality is, when you run out of time, both the NDP and bloc member have actually had a chance to ask questions now for 8.5 minutes before anybody else gets, two other members from both parties get a chance to speak. So I recognize that, and that is a reality of COVID and the virtual meetings. But in the same breath, there's many instances where a lot of members don't get a chance to ask questions because of the way it's set up right now. This way, at least, it would be as fair as possible to get as many members in to ask questions in an orderly fashion, and still reserves the right for the bloc and the NDP to get their full 8.5 minutes into their session, which is 3.5 minutes more than most of the members and 2 minutes more than people who go in the first round.
Mr. Housefather?
Yeah, yes, Mr. Chairman. I mean, obviously, this type of an arrangement favors the Liberal and Conservative members who have more members and are able to, diversify. But it seems very unfair to the NDP and Bloc in the sense that what keeps getting happening in other committees again is the Liberals and Conservatives go, and then there's a very limited amount of time. And it's true that the last Conservative and Liberal questioners are not there, but our parties still have gotten 2 rounds of questions, the same as the NDP and Bloc. And I think it would be unfair to take that 3rd round before them. So while I understand and respect the amendment that was brought, I don't think I would support it. Thanks.
Monsieur Savard-Tremblay?
Mr. Savard-Tremblay. Listen, in every committee, things are working well. Things are functioning fairly. I don't see why specifically in this committee we need to review the way things work. And so for this reason, I oppose the proposed amendment.
Straw?
Yeah, and as a Conservative, I'm good at math, and so I can see how this is going to go. I would say though, with respect, and I know we're in camera here, but we do, yes, we each represent parties. Yes, we each, but we also represent on our side 121 members, and that is why, quite frankly, if it was all about equality, we would have the same number of members on the committee as well. So it was an attempt to simply recognize the composition of the House and the ability for, having a couple of members not get up. We constantly hear about technical difficulties that chew up time. So I would hope that perhaps a solution would be that the chair would look to members for latitude to ensure that all members do get a chance whenever possible to ask questions, because we are, again, we are parties are a part of our system, and that's how we all get here for the most part. But I would simply say the reason that that we get more opportunities to ask questions is because we have more members in the House, and that is reflected here. So not trying to start off on a bad note, just trying to get us to recognize, if you're the 4th member who's put in time from our side and you get bumped by someone else who gets to go for 8.5 minutes, in terms of fairness, I recognize that's the way that it's been done, but I think the argument can be made for this amendment, but I guess we'll see how it goes here.
Ms. Salislav?
I'm just wondering if perhaps we could consider also to mitigate it somewhat, having fewer witnesses at a committee meeting. So even though there are, we seem to get bumped for time, et cetera, it gives everybody a better opportunity to actually question the witnesses as well. So I'm hoping that that will also be something taken into account, while not necessarily germane to this amendment. It does speak to the larger functioning, because yes, in all the committees I've been in, at least 2 members of the Conservative Party in each meeting don't have an opportunity to speak, when the NDP and the Bloc, as has just been made by our colleague, has had 8 minutes.
Any further debate? Should we vote on the amendment then?
Mr. Chair, may I?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. So the vote is on the amendment of Mr. Strahl. When I say your name, yay in favor, nay opposed. Ms. Bendayan.
Nay.
Mr. Housefather.
No.
Mr. McKay.
Yes.
Ms. Romanato.
Contre.
Mr. Sarai.
No.
Ms. Olislev.
Yes.
Mr. Hoback.
Yes.
Mr. Lewis.
Yes.
Mr. Strahl.
Yes.
Monsieur Savard-Tremblay.
Nope.
Mr. Blakey.
No.
Mr. Chair, the results are 6 nays and 5 yays.
Okay, so I consider the amendment accepted, adopted. Oh, sorry.
Sure.
No.
Sorry. Not adopted.
That's what I heard.
apologize.
Other way
Chair, I
around.
love this chair.
Yeah.
I apologize. The amendment is not adopted. So we will remain with the same amendment.
Mr. Chair, may I proceed with
Yes,
routine motion?
yes, absolutely.
Thank you. And so we are at document distribution, and that the clerk of the committee be authorized to distribute documents to members of the committee only when the documents are available in both official languages, and that witnesses be advised accordingly.
Any debate? Moved?
Et repas de travail.
Working meals, our favorite topic, that the clerk of the committee be authorized to make the necessary arrangements to provide working meals for the committee and its subcommittees.
I think they should be delivered by the House of Commons to every single member of Parliament, wherever they may be, whether it's John's cabin or Mark's farm. I think that would be a good idea. Home delivery sound good. Randy's smiling. I think he likes it. We could
DoorDash. I think DoorDash.
DoorDash. Yes, there you go.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't think this committee has that kind of a budget, so I'll just take it as that it's been adopted.
Okay, we take it out of the chair's budget then.
Go on, Ms. Bendan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Travel, accommodation, and living expenses of witnesses. That if requested, reasonable travel, accommodation, and living expenses be reimbursed to witnesses not exceeding 2 representatives per organization, provided that in exceptional circumstances, payment for more representatives be made at the discretion of the chair.
Any debate? Adopted?
Chair,
Yeah.
just one point. If we have witnesses outside of Canada, and I'm assuming that we're all vaccinated and we're post-COVID, and that would this apply to witnesses coming from outside of Canada too?
That's a good question, actually. I think we'd have to visit that at that time and make an
Just table
adjustment.
it for now.
Yeah, I think just we'll have to see how it goes and how the border turns out at that time. But we can always revisit that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay.
Accès aux réunions à huis clos.
Access to in-camera meetings, that unless otherwise ordered, each committee member be allowed to have one staff member at an in-camera meeting, and that one additional person from each House officer's office be allowed to be present.
Adopted?
Transcripts of in-camera meetings, that one copy of the transcript of each in-camera meeting be kept in the committee clerk's office for consultation by members of the committee or by their staff.
Any debate? Adopted?
Avis de motion. Qu'un préavis.
Notice of motion. That a 48 hours notice, interpreted as 2 nights, shall be required for any substantive motion to be considered by the committee unless the substantive motion relates directly to business then under consideration, provided that 1. The notice be filed with the clerk of the committee no later than 4 p.m. from Monday to Friday, that 2. The motion be distributed to members in both official languages by the clerk on the same day, the said notice was transmitted if it was received no later than the deadline hour, and that 3, notices received after the deadline hour or on non-business days be deemed to have been received during the next business day, and that when the committee is traveling on official business, no substantive motions may be moved.
Any debate? Adopted.
Monsieur le Président, ceci termine.
Mr. Chair, that is all the motions.
Mr. Blakey?
While we're on the subject of routine motions, I know that some committees have made it a practice to send like appropriate headsets and things of that nature to witnesses who are going to be appearing virtually for the sake of our interpreters. And I'm just wondering if we need a motion in order to institute that as our standard practice, or whether that's already provided for by the House.
Yes, Miss. Yes.
Sorry. Mr. Chair, it is already a standard practice that we would send headsets to witnesses.
I think if we just reverse ourselves, do we have a vote on the main motion on the speaking rotation? I think we had a vote on the amendment, but we didn't have a vote on the.
Mr. Chair, we did not.
We did not. Okay, can we do that?
Can we just say that we're in favor of realizing our amendment failed? We accept that.
Sure, that's fine. That's fine. Thank you, Mr. Straw.
Okay, and I have an additional routine motion proposal.
Sure.
I would propose that all meetings other than those deemed in camera be televised, or if that is not possible, then webcast.
Okay. Monsieur Savard-Tremblay.
I would like to make 3 motions. First, concerns on linguistic review of documents by the Translation Bureau. That all documents.
Point of order, Mr. Chair. We need to deal with Mr. Straw's motion first before we go to any other motions.
Okay. Okay. So, Mr. Straw, from what I understand, all meetings are already webcast, but we can have a vote on that motion if you'd like.
Well, yes, it does say at the beginning, just I'll read it again, that all meetings other than those deemed in camera be televised. And if that's not possible, then webcasts. So asking for televisation of our meetings.
Can we have a vote, Ms. Clerk? Madam Clerk?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You'd like to proceed to a recorded vote?
Yeah, or is there any debate on the motion at all? Does anybody want to have any comments? Yes, Ms. Romanato.
I just want to verify, obviously, in a perfect world, we'd have the capacity to televise every committee meeting, and I know that we are now at 28 committees, so I'm not sure if that's even feasible, but I know that if not, often all of the meetings are webcast. So I'm not sure if we need to just flag that obviously in a perfect world, we'd have enough facilities to do this, but not every, we don't have that many rooms. So I just wanted to bring it up. It's not an amendment. It's just, I just wanted to bring that up, that we might not have the capacity to do that, again, depending on when the committee meets as well.
Monsieur Tremblay, Savard-Tremblay.
I wanted to simply say that I'll reserve my time for later and not.
I can come back to you. That's no problem. Mr. Straw, you have another comment?
Oui, j'en suis conscient. C'est ce que.
I'm aware of that. I was just saying that.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Straw, did you have any other comments? No, you have to unmute.
I lowered my hand and didn't unmute. I would say I think we are mandated to meet during parliamentary break week, so perhaps we would have more access to that. It's simply obviously our constituents are very interested in our work, and it would be good to have that recognizing the backup of a webcast, which is great, but it is a separate request for televisation that needs to be made, and I would just like that to be our normal posture, if at all possible, recognizing again with capacity issues and COVID that it might not always happen, but always I would like the clerk to always request it, even if it's not always successful.
Okay. Any other debate? So are you making a formal motion then, Mr. Strahl, or is this just a general sort of?
No, I would like it added to the routine motions as read.
Okay. Madam Clerk, would you like to take a vote?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. All those in favor say yay. All those opposed say nay. Ms. Bendayan?
Oui, je vote en faveur.
Mr. Housefather?
Yes, I'm in favor.
Mr. McKay?
Yes.
Ms. Romanato?
Yes.
Mr. Sarai?
In favor.
Ms. Olislev?
Yes.
Mr. Hoback?
Yes.
Mr. Lewis?
Yes.
Mr. Strahl?
Yes.
Monsieur Saval-Tremblay?
Favorable, oui.
Mr. Blakey?
Yes.
Mr. Chair, that's all in favor.
Okay, that's great. So the motion is deemed adopted. Any other motions or anybody want to say anything else?
Mr. Chair, I believe you had Monsieur Saval-Tremblay.
Yes.
Tout à fait. Excusez-moi, c'est toujours le temps pour
Sorry, I needed time to activate my mic. So the first motion deals with the documents translated by the Translation Bureau, so that all documents submitted for committee business that do not come from a federal department or that have not been translated by the Translation Bureau be sent for prior linguistic review by the Translation Bureau before being distributed to members. You've received the three motions that I will be presenting. They're in both languages.
Motion. Yes, Mrs. Straw.
Yes, I understand. I just got these as we were considering the routine motions, and I understand that we are considering them in most committees. I would ask, just as out of courtesy, I would hope that we would have a chance to consider the full ramifications of this and come back to the committee, perhaps at our first meeting, to address this. I feel like I would want to make sure that the rights of all members are protected, even as we do try to make sure that we are operating within the guidelines. And I think there'll be additional sensitivities given that we'll be dealing with another country, I think, in this case, which is unilingually English, and so I think we want to make sure. I just want some time to consider these three motions together, perhaps, and I would just ask my colleague if we can table this until the next meeting so that we can come back with more robust commentary on them.
Monsieur Savat-Tremblay, you want to answer that? Or talk to that?
Well, I will see if most of the members are ready to vote on it now. Let's talk about it. And in the worst case, I'll see what would happen, but I don't know why we were able to discuss all of the other routine motions, but not this one. We didn't have that much more time for those. So I would like us to discuss these now.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I support Mr. Savard-Tremblay's motion. Basically what it's saying is that if the House itself, our own translation department, has not been the ones to translate a document first, meaning that some third party has provided it to us, then the House Translation Department is going to review it to make sure that the translation is okay, because we've had issues at other committees where the translation into French, when it's been done by a third party, has not been good. And I totally understand what Mark is saying, but we can actually, in this case, not receive the documents anyways until they've been translated. So all this is asking for is to make sure that the quality of the translation is okay. Et en effet, pour moi, je crois que
So I think that this is a good proposal. We just accepted a proposal from Mr. Strahl without any notice. So I don't know why we couldn't do this now. We've adopted this in other committees.
Mr. McKay?
To the clerk's opinion here, but the way I heard Mr. Strahl's argument was, in effect, a motion to defer for further consideration, and that would take precedence over the presentation of the motions. But I would defer to the clerk's view on whether, in fact, that is a motion to defer.
Mr. Chair, if I may.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. McKay. I heard Mr. Strahl asking Monsieur Savard-Tremblay if he wouldn't mind. I didn't hear an actual motion moved.
Well, then the question becomes, does Mr. Strahl wish to make a motion?
Well, yeah, if I don't make a motion to defer, then I will make a motion to amend because I am concerned that the rights of members are protected. We have we say that when something comes from a federal department that we don't require this notice. I would argue that we should add, if it comes from a member or a member's office, that we also would take that as a good faith as a document that is submittable to this committee. I think we need to be careful that we don't impact the rights of a member to operate in their official language in a timely manner. And again, I'm prepared to have recognizing the issue here, not wanting to be insensitive in any way. I simply want to make sure we're not going down a road that will impact the ability of members to conduct business at a future meeting. So I would, therefore, to Mr. McKay's point, I would formally ask that we table this discussion until the next meeting.
Mr. Savard-Tremblay, did you want to talk to that?
Yes, on the substance, I think this motion answers concerns raised by internal economy. Committee chairs are aware of the problems that we've had in committees. I think that we can think about these motions right now. Mr. Strahl said that he needs more time, but I think his mind was already made up since he's ready to present an amendment. So I maintain my motion.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just think maybe there's some broken telephone here. If our office, any of our offices, puts forward something to the clerk, it still needs to be translated before it can go to the committee. And when our office translates it ourselves, in my office, we may do the translation ourselves, but in most offices, it goes to the Translation Bureau anyways. So I'm not really seeing where the delay is here, because all this is saying is that the Translation Bureau needs to see the document before it goes out if it's already been translated by someone else. If it hasn't, the Translation Bureau is going to still need to translate it. That being said, and having used my argument, Mr. Chair, I would say that Mr. Straw's motion is a non-debatable motion, and we are right now speaking to the substance of the motion, and his motion was really supposed to go to a vote right away. Thanks.
He's right about that.
Okay, Madam Clerk.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The motion is that the debate be now adjourned. If you're in favor, say yay. If you're opposed, say nay. Ms. Bendayan.
En faveur.
Mr. Housefather.
Juste, Madame la greffière, que je comprends, ce vote-là.
So I want to be clear. This is on Mr. Straw's motion to adjourn the debate. Yes, it's to adjourn the debate on Mr. Savard-Tremblay's motion. Against. I'm sorry. I thought we were voting on the motion itself, so I will start again. If the committee agrees, it's on. The vote is on the motion.
I was just speaking in French.
Okay, that's fine.
Okay.
Yes, I was speaking French.
Debate be now adjourned. So it would be setting aside Monsieur Savard-Tremblay's motion for a later date. Ms. Bendayan.
Je vote contre.
Mr. Housefather.
Je vote contre.
Mr. McKay.
Sympathetic, but against.
Ms. Romanato.
Contre.
Mr. Sarai.
I vote against.
Ms. Olislev.
For.
Mr. Hoback.
For.
Mr. Lewis.
I vote yes.
Mr. Straw.
Yes.
Monsieur Savard-Tremblay.
Contre.
Mr. Blakey.
No.
Mr. Chair, that is 7 nays and 4 yays.
So the motion has been defeated, or the amendment has been defeated?
Mr. Chair, the motion to adjourn debate has been defeated, and now you will return to the motion of Monsieur Savard-Tremblay.
Okay. Monsieur Savard-Tremblay.
So are we going to vote on my motion? So I vote in favor of court.
Mr. Chair, you do have Ms. Olislev with her hand up.
I'm having difficulty hearing.
Mr. Chair, can you hear me okay?
Yes, yes.
Okay, you do have Ms. Olislev with her hand up.
Yes, okay. Go ahead, Ms. Ellslev.
I just wanted to say that I do think there should be an amendment. I'd like to move an amendment that if it does come from our own internal offices or our parliamentary resources, that it doesn't need to go through Translation Bureau in the interests of time. We have the capacity to translate, and we have been on committees up until this point, and we're able to bring motions in both official languages, and that hasn't caused issues. So I think that in the interest of time and effectiveness, that if it comes from our internal office or the OLO or the Liberal side as well, that we don't need to send it to Translation Bureau. I appreciate the idea of this motion, and it makes good sense because we need a high quality of French. C'est tellement important qu'on peut avoir.
It's important that we get clear and precise information, and that's why we have translation resources, but we can have both versions done in our own offices. That's what I wanted to say. Pardon, c'est ce que je voulais. Yes.
Yes, Madam Clerk.
Mr. Chair, may I just verify the wording with Ms. Olislev? I've written something down, but I just want to make sure that it is correct for everybody. So the motion would read with the amendment that all documents submitted for committee business that do not come from a federal department, comma, members' offices, comma, or that have not been translated by the Translation Bureau. And then it continues from there. Is that correct, Ms. Olislav?
Thank you very much.
Mr. Housefather?
Je veux juste demander une question à Mme Alislav. Je suis d'accord avec l'amendement, je crois.
I would like to ask a question of Ms. Alislav. I agree with the amendment. I just want to make sure that the intention is that when we translate something ourselves or from the House Leader's office, it doesn't need to go to the Translation Bureau. Is that all you mean? So those documents don't need to go through the Translation Bureau? Yes, that's exactly it. So we can give notice and provide a translated document.
I believe, though, that the Translation Bureau is the right resource. Several times in committee, I saw translations that were very poorly done, and that's why I maintain the motion.
So any other debate on the amendment? So, Madam Clerk?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So it is a vote on the amendment of Ms. Olislav, the addition of members' offices. Ms. Bendayan.
Je vote pour.
4.
I'm okay with this one. 4.
Mr. McKay.
In favor.
Ms. Romanato.
4.
Mr. Sarai.
In favor.
Ms. Olislav.
4.
Mr. Hoback.
I'm in favor.
Mr. Lewis.
I'm in favor.
Mr. Strahl.
Yes.
Monsieur Saval-Tremblay.
Autre.
Against.
In favor.
Mr. Chair, that is 10 yeas and 1 nay.
So I consider the motion, the amendment adopted. So we go back to the main motion now? Okay. So Monsieur Savat-Tremblay?
I have nothing to add on the main motion, and I'm ready to vote on the question.
Thank you. So the vote is on the main motion as amended. Ms. Bendayan.
Je vote pour.
4. 4.
Ms. Romanato.
4.
Mr. Sarai.
4.
Ms. Olislav.
Je vote pour.
Mr. Hoback.
Yeah, I'm for this. This makes sense.
Mr. Lewis.
I vote in favor.
Mr. Strahl.
Yes.
Monsieur Saval-Tremblay.
In favor, of course.
In favor.
Mr. Chair, that is 11 yeas.
I consider the motion adopted.
Permettez-vous que je poursuive?
May I continue? I had 2 other motions. Will you allow me to present the second one, please? Yes, go ahead. The second motion regards connectivity, technical tests, that the clerk inform each witness who is to appear before the committee that the House Administration Support Team must conduct technical tests to check the connectivity and the equipment used to ensure the best possible sound quality, and that the chair advises the committee at the start of each meeting of any witness who did not perform the required technical tests. You have received the text in both languages already.
So do we need a vote, Madam Clerk, or it looks like we have?
Mr. Chair, if you have consent, you don't need a recorded vote.
So do I have consent? Okay.
Yes.
I believe we have consent, Madam Clerk. Mr. Savard-Tremblay, anything else to present?
Mr. Savard-Tremblay, anything else? Yes, I have a last motion that talks about substantive motions in both official languages, that the text of any substantive motion or any motion in amendment of a substantive motion be distributed in writing in both official languages to all committee members before the committee begins debate on such a motion.
Mr. Strahl, I believe I saw your hand first.
I saw Mr. Blakey. I will.
Sorry, okay, Mr. Blakey.
Thank you very much, Mr. Strahl. J'ai juste une question de précision.
I have a question. I don't think we want to lose the ability to propose motions specifically on what the topic at hand. If we have a substantive motion that comes out of nowhere, I think it makes sense to provide them ahead of time. But if we're already talking about a discussion, talking about a topic, it sometimes makes sense to propose a motion. I think your motion also says that all amendments should be submitted ahead of time. But sometimes it happens that we develop an amendment while talking about a specific topic. So I don't want to prevent committee members from proposing something while they're debating or discussing a subject. That's my fear with this motion. I don't know if you can add anything to what you've said that could reassure me on this question. Is that truly what you're providing for with this motion? Answer. I fully agree that, yes, you need to be able to respond, but nothing prevents us, me, you, or anyone else from taking a minute or two to write down a motion when proposing it. Of course, we need to be responsive. Not everything needs to be done with prior notice. But when there's a substantive motion, it must be in writing.
Very much. I'm in agreement with many of the concerns that Mr. Blakey raised. There are times in committee, substantive motions that are outside of the flow of debate or a matter arising out of witness testimony or something that is heard at the table. There are already requirements to provide 48 hours notice for those substantive motions. What we're talking about here is now limiting the ability of a member to respond to something that comes up at a committee and either delaying or preventing that member from engaging in the debate in real time. And so I think I would think, quite frankly, that this likely violates the privileges of members and their ability to conduct business as is laid out in the procedure manual that we all have. I think we need to be very careful that while we are trying to make sure that we are respecting one another and that we also respect the rights of members that are laid out, the privileges that we each have. So if we get further into this, I would hope that we can just operate in that spirit of cooperation where we're trying to work with one another. But I don't think we can take away the ability of members to respond to something they hear, either with a proposal from any party or respond to something that they hear at the table and propose a motion. I think that would violate the rights and privileges of members of Parliament.
Mr. Housefather?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I do very much respect the idea that everything should be bilingual. But I think in this case, I agree with Mr. Blakey and Mr. Strahl. There's a number of concerns that I would have to not allow somebody to react immediately, even when we're doing bills on clause by clause. While you're supposed to bring amendments beforehand, you're still able from the table as a member of the committee to propose an amendment at the last minute, even to a bill. And so that's why we have the service of interpreters who are able to interpret everything we say. And when we propose a motion or an amendment, they then translate it into the other language. Et de respect, je suis tout à fait.
And I agree with what Mr. Savard Tremblay is saying. If someone is having trouble because they don't understand what exactly the motion or amendment intends, we can always ask to take a break and ask our colleagues for help to explain the motion or amendment, to give the gist of the motion. But I think we should leave the job of providing the meaning up to the interpreters when we're talking about the other language. And I would fear that this motion would prevent the committee from doing its work properly.
You're muted, Mr. McKay.
The great saying of 2021 will be, "You are muted." I take the view that this is an unnecessary motion. I haven't seen any example of this being of any difficulty in any committee I've sat on in the last year. Second of all, I do take the view as that espoused by Mr. Strahl that this may actually impact negatively on the rights of unilingual members who may want to move a motion and can only function in one official language. I think there are plenty of opportunities to address those limitations in the context of a committee.
Monsieur Savard Tremblay. Monsieur Savard Tremblay?
Oui.
Yes. The interpretation wasn't finished, and that's a good example of what I mean. It's not always easy to figure out the interpretation, and we've had many examples of where the interpretation didn't come through, but there are limits to having something live immediately. And sometimes it's difficult to understand. There are witnesses who don't speak both languages perfectly. I think at the very least, we should have something in writing before we're required to vote or talk about a motion. We could take a few minutes to simply write down the motion, send it by email to everyone. That's almost instantaneous. Of course, you need to react immediately when you want to propose something, but at least to have the motion in writing before we vote on it, especially in this era when we're voting by Zoom, when there are so many technical problems, when the message is distorted. I've had colleagues who weren't even able to talk, who couldn't even say what they wanted. They couldn't get their message across. That's why this measure needs to be put in place. I'm trying to see how I could adapt the motion, modify the motion to make it acceptable to all of you. Perhaps I could change the last sentence, begins debate on such a motion. Before the committee begins debate on such a motion. Perhaps I could change that. Motion or amendment. Mr. Savard Tremblay.
Oui. Now, being a new chair, it's a little bit different, but whenever I have been on committee and a motion has emerged or amendment has emerged, usually that person tells the clerk in whatever language. The clerk then will write the motion, and the motion will be given to the chair, and the chair will repeat the motion or the amendment to the satisfaction of the member. Mm-hmm. Would you not agree, or?
Ben oui.
Yes, I agree. That's how it works.
I mean, if you have interpreters there already, mm-hmm. and they're able to interpret the amendment or the motion in real time in front of the member who proposes that amendment or that motion, and that can I mean that once that is done, then that is read to the chair, and the chair reads it to the whole committee, and usually the member at that time will agree or disagree with the wording of the motion. I'm just saying that as a point of information. I have Ms. Mendayan.
Oui, justement, Monsieur le Président, pour.
Yes, to add to your point and your suggestion, I think that in our committee we have a clerk who is perfectly bilingual, and perhaps we could ask the clerk to repeat the amendment or the motion in the other language, as Monsieur Savard-Tremblay just suggested an amendment, so that the translation, so that the motion is available in both languages before voting. Maybe this can be done orally by the clerk. But I know that with the technical problems that are a feature of our times, that we were saying that "you're on mute" was going to be the catchphrase for this year. I think it's not very hard to send an email. If it bothers you, just don't open it. I don't think it's so difficult. It's an exaggeration to ask for something in writing. And I think my motion was so reasonable, and now I suggest to amend it.
The debate, so we're voting on the motion, right? Okay, so Madam Clerk.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Sorry. Again, Mr. Chair, did Mr. Pierre Savard amend the motion?
I don't think he amended it. He talked about amending it, but I didn't
he talked about it, but he didn't actually formally amend it.
I didn't hear one.
I just want to make that.
Souhaitez-vous que je vous la...
Yes, so do you want me to read it back to you with the amendment? Okay, it is an amendment. So I was also thinking as the debate went on, so that the text of any substantive motion or any motion in amendment of a substantive motion be distributed in writing both official languages to all committee members before the committee vote on the motion.
Okay. Mr. Blakey?
Just I'm wondering, as a dry run, if we should get that in writing in English before proceeding to a vote.
Bien sûr, Madame la greffière.
Yes, Madam Clerk, can you send that along with the change?
That, but it will take a moment, and I just want to make sure that the intent of this motion would then have the responsibility of the clerk to translate all motions and amendments? Or the responsibility of the members?
I think as per the first motion we passed, it shouldn't it go to the Translation Bureau?
Madam Clerk, what is the normal procedure in most committees?
So, Mr. Chair, I can only speak to the committees that I am the clerk of. We do not have this motion, and the practice is that debate is free-flowing, especially for amendments from the floor. If members have them in writing in both official languages beforehand, then it's definitely useful. But the clerk is not a certified translator, and I would feel somewhat uncomfortable being put in that position.
Okay, so can we have a vote on the amendment then? Sorry, Mr. Housefather. Sorry, I didn't see you.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, just a couple of things. I think Mr. Blakey was making a point when he was saying that the clerk should do this and send it out to show how difficult this would actually be and how this is not customary. I actually don't think Mr. Savard-Tremblay is allowed to amend his own motion. I mean, but I don't really care one way or the other. I think the intention is that I don't think that this makes sense, and I'll vote against the amendment and against the motion if you make us vote twice. Thanks.
Mr. Savard-Tremblay, did you want to say something?
Puis-je demander
What could I ask then to my honorable colleague how he wants to amend this? How could this be amended to be acceptable to him? Well, if you'll allow me, Mr. Chair. I've been MP for 5 years, and I was chair of a committee in the last parliament, and I've never seen a problem. We always have simultaneous interpretation, and if something is moved during a committee, the interpreters translate it. Or if sometimes the clerk or bilingual MP will translate for somebody who wants more precision. But I've never seen a spontaneous motion be translated. The clerk would have to interrupt the meeting to send a bilingual email to all the members. But if I see that we have problems with motions or amendments, I will help you to find a way to avoid the problem. But as an MP, I have never had that experience. But perhaps we can see how things go. And if there's a problem, let us know, and we will find a solution. Thank you. Okay. Of course. If there's a problem, we will all look for a solution. But our colleague says that he was chair of a committee. He's been an MP for 5 years. But we've been in these really special circumstances on Zoom, and if ever we can meet all in person, we can amend this motion or withdraw it. But there have been cases where the message was distorted, and I think at least temporarily, it's not too much to ask.
You asking for a vote on this motion, Monsieur Savard-Tremblay? I'm sorry, on your amendment.
Yes, oui.
Madam Clerk?
So,
Madam Clerk, is that in order? I saw you respond with a cue to Mr. Housefather's remark that was an amendment to one's own motion was out of order. I just would like the chair perhaps to give us some guidance on that.
So, thank you, Mr. Strahl. My advice would be that it is inadmissible to amend your own motion. But Mr. Chair, maybe if you seek the unanimous consent of the committee to have the vote on the motion as Mr. Savard-Tremblay has proposed it the second time with the word votes, then that would be acceptable to all.
Do I have unanimous consent? Okay.
As long as we're just doing one vote here.
Okay, that's fine.
So thank you, Mr. Chair. I will proceed to a vote on the motion. Ms. Bendayan.
Je vote contre.
Mr. Housefather.
I vote against.
Mr. McKay.
Against.
Ms. Romanado.
Contre.
Mr. Sarai.
I vote against.
Ms. Alaslev.
Contre.
Mr. Hoback.
I vote against.
Mr. Lewis,
I vote against.
Mr. Strahl,
Against.
Monsieur Savard-Tremblay,
Pour, bien entendu.
Mr. Blakey.
Contre.
So, excuse me, Mr. Chair, that is 10 nays and 1 yay.
So the motion is not adopted. Okay. Any other further business? Anything else, Madam Clerk?
Mr. Chair, I leave it in the hands of the committee. Mr. Blakey has his hand up.
Okay. Mr. Blakey?
Mr. Blake,
Thank you very much. Pardon me. I just wondered if this is the appropriate time to talk a little bit about the structure of the study, or if the idea was simply to establish the routine motions and move on from there. If we are going to talk a little bit about the structure of the study, then I would have some remarks to offer. But if we're deferring that conversation, that is also fine by me.
I think we'll be deferring that conversation, Mr. Blakey. Do we know when the next meeting is, Madam Clerk?
Mr. Chair, we do not. At this point, the motion from the House allows the subcommittee to sit during sitting weeks, but the committee as a whole must sit during break weeks.
Okay. So why don't we sit down and discuss the timing of the next meetings and the subcommittee meeting, and then we can go from there. How's that? Just to get a little bit more organized, since this is the first time we're meeting. Is that okay with everybody? I've only been chair for an hour, so I have to think this through. So, do we know?
Still time to resign if you wish.
Do we know? Does anybody know? So, for the other parties, do people know who are going to be sitting on that subcommittee, just so that we know that, Mr. Strahl?
Well, I think after my surprise nomination as vice chair, I suspect that I will be.
Yes, sorry.
No, but I was just, I think I'm wondering if we could get some, and maybe this goes to Mr. Blakey's point. I would just want to make sure that we aren't, we are not finding ourselves missing the first upcoming break week for a meeting, and that we end up, we missed that one because we're doing organizational things, and then we're way down the road and not meeting during that first break week. So I don't know what we need to do to ensure that we actually have, at the next full meeting here, I'm hoping that we're going to hear from our ambassador to the US or global affairs officials or something, that we could get some level of agreement that the first meeting during that break week, whenever it occurs, is not another meeting where we're talking to ourselves. So perhaps I can just put that on the record that I'm hopeful that the subcommittee will meet sooner rather than later, so that we can meet during the upcoming break week with a substantive meeting, and that this doesn't simply end up being a through no one would do it on purpose, but I don't think we want to get down the road where we miss out on opportunities to talk about something as important as Line 5. We have a mandated deadline to report back to the House. So it looks like I've started something here, but that's my desire is that we proceed with that. We get a substantive meeting during the break week.
Mr. Housefather?
I just wanted to agree with Mr. Strahl, not to prolong the meeting, but I was also hoping maybe we could just have agreement on the committee, Mr. Chair, through you, that we invite the Canadian ambassador to the United States to appear before the committee next week during the break week, so that the clerk could extend the invitation, and hopefully all the good people on the subcommittee will do great work to schedule our meetings. But I agree that we shouldn't wait for that, so that the clerk can actually get her invitation out. So I would agree with Mr. Strahl's comment about the ambassador, and if we could perhaps agree all that she be invited, I think that's a great idea. Thanks.
Okay, Mr. McKay.
I don't know who should be more disturbed, Mr. Strahl or Mr. Housefather, but I'm agreeing with them both. I think that the sooner we move to substance, the more relevant this committee will be. And I would concur in the immediate invitation to the ambassador so that she can address the larger state of relations between Canada and the U.S. from her perspective.
Okay. Ms. Robinato, were you next?
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. So I agree that we should extend, if it's the agreement of the committee, an invitation to the Canadian ambassador to the United States, of course, depending on her availability, and of course, hoping that if she does not have the required headset, that we have time to get it to her. But also perhaps given that we are Tuesday evening, the availability of facilities to be able to do a subcommittee meeting might be hard this week. Perhaps we could schedule a subcommittee meeting next week during a riding week, as well as the ambassador for next week, so that it allows the subcommittee adequate time to flesh out some plans for us going forward, but not losing opportunity next week to meet. Thank you.
Mr. Hobart?
Yeah, I'd like to see 2 substantive meetings next week, and I agree to have the ambassador and government officials in that first meeting. It gives us a lay of the land. It gives us a sense of direction. It gives us a list of items that maybe be on their agenda that we're not aware of and things that they're dealing with. And then once we have that, then we can proceed with that. I'd like to see 2 meetings next week because time is of an issue here, and I think we need to get moving into this as quickly as possible. So, you know, I understand the subcommittee, but a lot of committees don't have subcommittees. The committee itself just decides when they're going to have meetings and what they're going to do. So in this case, I just encourage that we get going. And I agree with Mr. McKay. The sooner we get going, the more relevant this committee becomes. And I think there's more issues that we can deal with and be constructive in as we go forward. So the sooner we get going, the better.
Mr. Lewis?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'm going to be very brief. There is very little more important than to move this forward and move it quickly. We really need to. We got to cement this relationship, Canada-U.S., and I would be very much willing to come to the table whatever the time the meetings are. I'm ready to go. So I just wanted to let you know that, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Benign.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I obviously share the views of all of the colleagues who have proposed the ambassador appear at the meeting as soon as possible at the meeting, our first substantive meeting of this committee. I wonder, just picking up on something Mr. Hoback said, if the committee would agree that perhaps all members would be in a position to discuss things moving forward rather than create a separate subcommittee. It certainly worked very well. Mr. Hobeck and I had the experience on international trade.
That would be the will of the committee, if that's the way the committee feels. Yes, Mr. Straw.
I would just want to ensure that we aren't then using the time of, I understand how that works, but we don't have the right to meet during sitting weeks. Like we're as the clerk, my understanding that there's no capacity for us to meet, so the planning has to occur somewhere. And I think I would normally say I'm not looking for another meeting as the vice chair, but I would say because of the structure that the House provided for this committee, my concern would be that we would then be spending our time during the only time we're allowed to meet talking about witness lists and that sort of, and the reports. So by having a subcommittee work on it, perhaps that gives us more flexibility so that we can, if there's capacity, actually engage in some of that work that we can't engage on as this committee except in break week. So our time is actually, there's 4 weeks that we have between now and when we're supposed to report as the House mandated us to. And so I just don't want to lose time doing subcommittee work and lose time during sitting weeks because we're not actually permitted to meet during those times. So that's my only flag to that. I want everyone involved. From our side, they will be, but that's my worry.
Mr. McKay?
hesitate to disagree with the inestimable Ms. Bendayan, but my experience has been that a well-motivated subcommittee is a far more efficient use of time, can arrive at witness lists and set out an agenda for a committee much more efficiently than a full committee. Full committee, you got 12 different opinions and you have to go through every one of the opinions because everybody's got their opinion until they change their minds, in which case they've got two opinions. I would prefer to see a subcommittee. The NDP and the bloc are going to be on the same are going to be the same members are going to be on the subcommittee as is Mr. Stroll. It's just a case up to the Liberals as to who they pick for their representative on the subcommittee.
Madam Clerk.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to recap what I'm hearing to make sure that I have everything as all members have said. So what I'm hearing is that there would be a subcommittee meeting as soon as possible, either this week if I can find a slot, or as early as possible during the break week, and that the substantive meetings during the break week should include the ambassador as well as global affairs officials. Mr. Chair, it might be worth noting as well that the motion adopted by the House does have other ministers and officials that are listed in that. And if the committee agrees, I could start reaching out to them immediately. Another thing that might be helpful for the committee is if they agree to allow the analysts to propose witnesses and do perhaps a bit of a draft work plan that we could then discuss in the subcommittee.
It's a good idea.
So can I maybe make a comment here? I think we've sort of understood that the committee meetings will be Tuesdays and Thursdays from 3:30 to 5:30, from what I understand. And I understand there's an interest of getting the ambassador and some GAC officials. So could I propose, because I don't know how quickly we can get a subcommittee this week, is it possible that next week, Tuesday afternoon, we could have the steering committee, and Thursday we can try to give at least some time to GAC officials and the ambassador to appear on Thursday, and after that we could get a more permanent steering committee at a certain time, just because of the rapidity of how things are moving. Yes, Ms. Alislav.
I think that if we could possibly not have a steering committee in a break week, to the point that was made earlier, I think that the clerk made an excellent point. We already have a list of officials and ambassadors and ministers that we could have two very effective meetings, because there's a lot of the lay of the land that we don't know, and we could get all of that lay of the land, plus or minus, done in the two meetings next week, and have an additional outside of that Tuesday and Thursday meeting if that's when you want to have the subcommittee, or this week, whichever. But if we could have our two, as you suggested, substantive meetings, the Tuesday, Thursday, 3:30 to 5:30, with natural resources or GAC officials or Industry Canada officials or whomever is available, that might be a more productive use of time. Because again, building on what Mark said, we literally have 4 break weeks before April 15th. If one of those break weeks needs to be taken up with the writing of the report or whatever, that limits us down to 3. And so it means that 1 week for officials then only leaves us 2 for other witnesses. So I really am concerned about how much we can pack in and into each one of those meetings, so that we don't miss any of the critical information that we obviously are so compelled and prioritized to be able to address. Thank you.
Mr. Hoback?
Yeah, there's some options here. Like, I think we're all in agreement with government officials and the ambassador for Tuesday. I think that's pretty well straightforward. So that should go forward. The subcommittee can meet this week or Wednesday or Monday next week, and then we can still be in a position to have witnesses in place for Thursday also. So I'd strongly encourage, to do everything you can to have your subcommittee this week and try to find a slot to have that call and make that happen. But you've got pretty well consent from all parties here that are speaking to have the government officials and the ambassador there for Tuesday. So let's aim for that. And then if we're looking at line 5, if that's what has to be done by April 15th, we could actually start submitting witnesses for that for Thursday. And, then the subcommittee can still do its planning, and the clerks can have a list of witnesses to contact and start slotting in witnesses in those time slots. And if you said Tuesday, Thursday is our time slot, then then the clerks know that, and they can start coordinating the witnesses for that Tuesday, Thursday time slot.
The only issue I find is that I feel is that there may not be enough time this week to have a steering committee scheduled for this week. And I think the steering committee from the committees that I've been on have been very helpful, because a lot of stuff gets decided at the steering committee level, and it doesn't take away time from the main committee, which I find, the main committee is when you have witnesses and when you want to really get into the subject matter, and a lot of the stuff is decided in the steering committee. So can I just work with the clerk over the next few days just to figure out how this is all going to materialize, because I need to know what the scheduling is. I appreciate the fact that we only have 4 weeks, and I know that there is a time limitation. If we're going to do this thematically, I think that we can always start taking witnesses, but I think that we should have some guidance going forward as to what we are going to do. Initially next week we can try to populate the two committees if possible. Yes, Mr. Straw.
So 2 things I'd like to do here. One would be to move the appropriate motion to give the clerk and the analysts the ability to do the work that the clerk proposed to populate draft witness lists and to reach out to the officials that we all unanimously voted in favor of calling. I would offer this, Mr. Chair, if, as you said, that is the time, and we'd leave that to the whips to confirm. I would try to schedule something Tuesday, a substantive meeting.
Okay.
Like let's give it a go. The ambassador obviously is a busy person, but I'm sure we can get specialists from government affairs or global affairs, sorry, and one of the other departmental officials should be available to us with a week's notice. There's no excuse for us not to have a meeting. If we wanted to take the back half of that meeting or the last 30 minutes to go into a subcommittee, I would be open to that to go forward. But I think we have enough direction given if we empower the clerk and the analyst that we can populate those meetings, both of them, to be substantive meetings where we hear from witnesses. That would be my proposal to you from our side.
Okay, Mr. Blakey.
I was just going to intervene to say that I appreciated your suggestion, Mr. Chair, and I think we are getting up and going, and the dates are what they are in the motion. I think we're all familiar with the parliamentary calendar when the motion was drafted, presented, and voted on, and we're all familiar with the fact that it does take some time to get a committee up and going, particularly in light of the fact that the House resources are already stretched pretty thin, with upwards of what was the number now, 26 or 28 committees. Can't quite recall, but it's substantial. So, I appreciate everyone's desire, and I share it, to get going on the substantive work. I think we can have at least one substantive meeting next week, which, as far as I'm concerned, ain't bad. And if we take one of those meetings in order to have a serious discussion about how we structure the study, because I do think there's some real questions about how we get that structured, whether we want to do it thematically, and if so, what that looks like, and therefore how many witnesses we might be presenting per topic if we're going to divvy it up by topic, which is something that I'd like to see us do. It may not be what we ultimately decide to do as a committee, but it's certainly something I'd like to propose. Was prepared to propose that this evening when we had some additional time. I think we spent more time talking about meetings to plan the work than we did actually planning the work this evening. So, for me, I came ready to kind of talk about how we might structure this work, and I get some of that work done tonight. I think a lot of the time for that has already passed, so I'm resigned to the idea that we would take one of the slots that we have for next week as a planning meeting. So I just want to offer that up and let you know, Mr. Chair, that if you were interested in putting your proposal to a vote, namely that we have a meeting with officials next week, but also that we take a meeting in order to structure the study and get a better sense of how we're going to do this going forward, that would have my full support.
Ms. Romanato.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I just want to thank MP Blakey for reinforcing what I brought forward about 10 minutes ago. So I think the clerk is very competent in terms of setting up times, and if it's the will of the committee to allocate one of the slots next week to deal with committee business to organize, we'll do so, as well as setting up based on the availability of the witnesses that have been put forth. Thank you.
Mr. Strahl, did you want to speak again?
Yeah, I think the whole purpose of the committee being scheduled when it is that there are not these conflicts that we find ourselves faced with during sitting weeks. There are, I don't know if Canada-China is meeting, but none of the other committees, unless they are scheduling into break weeks now, are eating up the resources that are normally so scarce. So I think we shouldn't be worried about resources for break weeks. That's why this was set up the way it was with the proposal that we all agreed to. And so, look, I understand if we're going to go down this road, but I just think that is not something that should prevent us from working substantively and asking with 1 week's notice for people to present on the Canada-U.S. relationship. This isn't a surprise particularly. I think we can definitely fill up 2 meetings and take some time to talk about the things that Mr. Blakey wanted to talk about tonight at the end of one of those meetings. But I think we should strive to hear from witnesses at both the Tuesday and Thursday meeting next week. And quite frankly, that's why we've done it during the break week, is so that is always a possibility.
Mr. Strahl, did you want to say anything to that? Sorry, Mr. Blakey. Did you want to put forward a motion?
The only thing that I would, I was just going to seek some clarification. I mean, I do think that some members at various points over the last half hour or so have indicated that they were moving a motion of some kind. So I'm just wondering what's on the floor at the moment, and if there's anything on the floor, then we can dispense with that one way or the other and keep going until we land on something a majority of us can agree on.
My intention of making those comments was not to prevent the committee from having adequate time, was making the committee more operational and more efficient. And that's why I thought of all the steering committees that we have, I mean, or the ones that I've been on, have been more organized and have conducted the studies in a manner which is more efficient for everyone. So that was the purpose of my comments. Yes, Mr. Housefather.
Mr. Chairman, just to try to move things forward, let me move that the subcommittee meet next Tuesday during the allotted meeting time of the committee to plan for the future meetings of the committee, and that on Thursday, the clerk be authorized to invite witnesses from the list that the House of Commons determined should be invited from the committee, with a priority going to the Canadian ambassador to the United States and the officials from Global Affairs. But if she cannot get those witnesses, she finds other witnesses from the list. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Any other debate on Madam Clerk?
Mr. Chair, did you want a recorded vote or did you want to seek consent first?
Well, do we have consent?
Yep, I'm fine. I'm fine with it. It's a good motion.
Do we have unanimous consent?
No, I would seek to amend Mr. Housefather's motion to have the subcommittee meet for 1 hour on Tuesday, and that the second hour have witnesses as he's described for the Thursday meeting, so that we have substantive witnesses at both meetings next week.
Anybody would like to speak to that? Mr. McKay?
Either way, just get on with it. For God's sakes, people. If we can do an hour of substance and an hour of procedure, great. But I think that first up needs to be the ambassador and senior officials, and whether that's on Tuesday or that Thursday, I don't think it much matters. But I do think that having subcommittee to organize subsequent witnesses is actually a useful thing, because Otherwise, you have this endless debate among 12 people. You just can't do it. So whether it's Mr. Stroll's amendment or whether it's Mr. Housefather's main motion, both are supportable, in my opinion.
Okay, so do we want to, any other comments on Mr. Stroll's motion? Madam Clerk?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll just go right to a recorded division on the amendment of Mr. Stroll. Those in favor say yay. Those opposed say nay. Ms. Bendayan.
Nay.
Mr. Housefather.
No.
Mr. McKay.
Yay.
Ms. Romanato.
Nay.
That was a nay. Is that correct? Okay.
Nay.
Thank you. Mr. Sarai.
Nay.
Ms. Alislev.
Yay.
Mr. Hoback.
Yes.
Mr. Lewis.
Yes.
Mr. Strahl.
Yes.
Monsieur Saval Tremblay.
Nope.
Mr. Blakey.
Yes.
Mr. Chair, that is 6 yeas and 5 nays.
Okay, so the amendment is adopted. Yes, Mr. Hoback.
Oh, nothing. Sorry.
Okay. So do we, any further, are we going to vote now on the main motion now?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. We'll vote on the main motion as amended. Ms. Bendayan.
Nay.
Mr. Housefather.
Yes.
Mr. McKay.
Yes.
Ms. Romanato.
Yes.
Mr. Sarai.
Yes.
Ms. Alislev.
Yes.
Mr. Hoback.
Yes.
Mr. Lewis.
Yes.
Mr. Strahl.
Yes.
Monsieur Saval Tremblay.
Oui.
Mr. Blakey.
Yes.
Mr. Chair, that's 10 yeas and 1 nay.
So the motion is adopted. So I will, any other thoughts from anybody, any other motions? So I will work with the clerk and we will put together some dates and timing and we'll send that out to you in the next few days, I believe. Right, Madam Clerk? Okay. Motion to adjourn? Do I need one of those?
Yeah, just
Oh,
All in
turn it
favor?
off.
All in
Yeah.
favor?
Yeah. I
Great,
was in
okay.
favor an hour ago.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, everybody. And I look forward to seeing you guys all next week. Have a great weekend.